Good evening. Welcome to the Vortex Sarasota Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. Got a really great guest tonight. I've known this gentleman for quite a few years. Had the privilege of speaking in his church at one point. Just a really, not just a good author, but a great guy too. So I'd like to introduce you to Donald Jackson. Donald, glad to have you here.
Well, thank you, George.
Absolutely.
Great to be here. It's my pleasure.
Cool. Donald, you were the minister. You were a Baptist minister at one point, right?
Yes, for about 7 years. Actually, 14 years. I was in one church 7 years. And then I became somewhat disillusioned, to say the least.
That's hard to believe.
Yes. And then I became a university professor for several years. And I've had several careers in my life, and it's been an interesting pilgrimage for me.
It's amazing what'll happen, things you didn't think ever would, provided you stick around, don't die.
That's right.
You know?
It's important to stick around.
It's real important.
Yes.
Donald Jackson has written a book called Religious Lies and Religious Truths. The truth will set you free. Of course, it might hurt you first, right?
Oh, yes. Yes, it does.
It does. So you were a minister here for Unity for what, 15 or 20 years?
Well, my wife and I were co-ministers of Unity of Sarasota for about 21 years.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And then we retired in 2007, and I thought that I was, finished with ministry, but I decided that I'm never finished.
Well, I think that we live longer now. I believe we live better now if we're not finished.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So I think that's wise on your part. We finally get something that's worthwhile at about the last 10 years of our life,
That's right. And so we were moving back to Sarasota area from a mountain home, Arkansas, where we were for a couple of years, and that became a cocoon out of which my book was birthed.
Right.
So it gave me an opportunity to have solace and, a very, very meditative time. And so I was able to write the book during that period.
So you got caught in 2008, huh?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I lost my entire portfolio, which was fairly substantial,
right,
in the crash of 2008. And that was fairly stressful, and it took some adjusting. And so we found out what's important in life.
Boy, it will certainly show you what's important.
It'll get your attention.
It gets your attention,
yes,
that's for sure.
No question about it.
Do you think that this book would have come out had you not had that problem?
This book never would have been written had I not actually lost everything and then moved out to Arkansas, where I had the opportunity to really reflect on what I have been writing all of my life. I've been writing this book all my life.
Right.
I just penned it in 2 months.
That was the way my book, 6 weeks, bang, it was done. But
right.
I had been writing it for a long time.
Right, exactly.
But it was a matter of getting that right moment, that right time to do it. And you expressed it so well, cocoon.
Yes.
Because that's exactly where I was at, that same kind of thing. So you moved to Arkansas in 2008 or shortly after?
Yes, 2009 we moved out to Arkansas.
Is that in the Ozarks?
Yes, northern Ozarks, close to Missouri line.
Right.
Mountain home close to the lakes there, Bull Shoals Lake and
right,
Norfolk Lake.
Big lake there.
Yeah, big lakes, huge.
Right. Mm-hmm. How's the mosquitoes there?
Not too bad.
Really?
Yeah, that was not an issue. It was either too much water or not enough.
Really?
Yes.
And the weather?
Weather, hot, very hot.
And in the winter?
Oh, cold.
Yeah.
In fact, we moved the 1st of June, and I was actually packing the trailer for our furniture, and I was up in the trailer, and it was 110 degrees outside. Can you imagine how hot it was inside the trailer?
Yeah.
130 maybe. So, I'm too old.
You weren't
for that.
mumbling under your breath.
No, I'm too old for that.
I hear that. I'm too old for that myself. So let's talk about your book, Religious Lies, Religious Truths. First of all, where can they buy it?
Well, you can buy it from me. You can buy it.
What's your website?
You go to my website.
And that is?
religiouslies-religiostruths.com.
When you say dash, it's the hyphen, not the underscore?
No, it's the hyphen.
Okay.
Hyphen. And then it has a buy where you can buy through using PayPal, and I will send it to you immediately. Or you can go to Amazon. Now, one of the problems with Amazon, I'll have to be honest, is that that I used another publisher to start with.
Right.
And I was not happy with them, and so I canceled my affiliation with them and asked them to remove it from Amazon. Well,
Right.
they didn't remove it immediately, and it stayed on the first page top spot for several weeks. And after a while, I was able to get them to remove, and then my current publisher is on page 3, so it's not where I want it to be.
I understand.
So I have to, I think my website is probably right now the best place to order the book.
Well, I think go to the website for sure, because that's the best place for the author. It's amazing the amount of work that goes into one of these, and
Yes.
the amount of time. Not just the time that you're writing it, but all the other time, because there's think time, there's meditation time, there's
Yes.
all kinds of, long before it ever gets penned. So why'd you write the book? What's your motive?
Well, the motive is basically expressed on the back of the book, and I think this is, maybe I could just read
Please
this.
do.
I think that this might be helpful.
Absolutely.
The author, a former Southern Baptist minister, has written a liberating book on religion that is designed to awaken, not merely to inform. The thesis of his book challenges the traditional and orthodox interpretation of Christianity, charging that since the 4th century, Christianity has become a new religion. The religion that was created at the Council of Nicaea in 325
Right.
deviated from the original teachings of Jesus, since those teachings were thought to be too difficult for the masses to emulate. This substitute religion, which he calls Christianism, has failed to change the world, since it is a religion of accommodation. It is a religion of cheap grace, a repudiation of universal grace that portrays God as unconditional love. The author believes that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which the proponents of Christianism have failed to deliver. The claim of Christianism for uniqueness and originality tends to rely on internal evidence that exists only in a vacuum and ignores the evidence of history and external sources. The author seeks to show that these extraordinary claims cannot be substantiated by close examination of external evidence. He calls for a return to the teachings of Jesus and the embrace of innate divinity, which he calls the indwelling Christ. The author employs a unique writing style by quoting Thomas Jefferson at the beginning of most chapters, pointing out that Jefferson supports his conclusions. So that gives you an overview of really what this book is about. And I think that it's evident that Christianity, as we know it, has failed. All you have to do is look around and see what's happening in the world. I've never seen so much chaos
Well,
as
it's
exists.
evident, but not
Yes.
to everyone.
I wonder where they are.
Yeah, well, they're asleep.
They must be.
Like you said, you
Yeah.
want to awaken people. I suspect you have Baptist pulpits just clamoring to get you in the middle in there to talk to them, right?
This is going to surprise you. The Baptist minister of the church where I was when I left the Baptist ministry,
Right.
is a wonderful human being. I mean, he's a PhD, so he's very well educated.
Sure.
And he ordered 5 of my books.
Is that right?
And he said, I can hardly wait to get into reading your book because I know that you have something for me to hear.
And he's been a minister for how long?
Oh, he's been a minister for 30, 40 years.
So when you're a minister 30, 40 years in a Baptist church,
Yes.
somewhere you have to know inside of you that something's not working.
Well, I'll tell you what it is, and this is one of the things that I write about in the introduction of the book. Many mainstream ministers know the evidence that I present in this book.
They have to.
They know it.
Yeah.
They studied it in seminary. Now, when they got into their ministry, into their churches, they had to speak what the congregation was willing to accept.
Right.
And so these ideas were not acceptable by the majority of the people in the pew, and therefore they accommodated themselves to the level of understanding and acceptance of the people who were listening to their talks. And if they didn't, George, they'd lose their job.
Oh, absolutely. And
So-
someone else could come
So
in
it's
quick.
about economics.
Right.
And I understand that. I mean, when I left our church in Richmond, Virginia, back in the 60s, middle 60s, it was not easy.
Why'd you
I
leave?
had 3 children. I tell about that in the book. I decided one day that it would be wonderful to have the black church join us in a 5th Sunday service on Sunday night.
And this was where?
This was in the Richmond, Virginia area.
Okay.
And I said to the Board of Deacons, I said, this would be a great idea for us to do this. Well, I didn't realize it, but I created a firestorm.
Oh, I bet you did.
And
I'm sure
it
you
was so shocking that my friends, whom I thought were really close to me, actually turned on me over this issue.
did. What year was that?
This was in 1967.
Yeah.
And 66, 67, because I left in 67 and went to Puerto Rico, where I was a professor there at the university. But when I realized what was happening, I said, I cannot in integrity stay in this church as the minister. My theology was changing. I could not accept the social position, stance that the church had taken. And the interesting thing is that these are lovely people, wonderful people. They're my friends.
Right.
And I don't want to put them down.
Right.
That's not what I'm about. But at the same time, even today, as wonderful as a group as they are, they have absolutely 0 blacks attending their service.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks.
When I first came to Fort Myers in '74, there were still black and white drinking fountains.
Oh, yes.
Left
I
over
grew, I
from,
grew up in Alabama with that.
and
Yeah.
it's when I look back on that, it amazes me. So, someone buys your book, right, and they read it. What do you want them to go away with most? What do you want to happen for them?
I want them to understand that there is a solution to the world's problems, and that is a return to the teachings of and the practice of the teachings of Jesus.
So,
Yeah.
in that, do you see that as the Baptists see it, that Jesus was the only Son of God?
Oh, absolutely not. And in my book, I have several chapters that point this out, and the one where chapter 4 I call "Searching for the Real Jesus."
Right.
And in that, I identify whom I think the real Jesus is, and it's then the chapter on that actually Jesus was promoted to God by the Nicene Council.
Absolutely.
Wasn't that wonderful?
Constantine-
I mean, they just promoted him.
Absolutely.
You know? And basically all of that was done for control. And religion has been and is even today a tool of control. It controls people. It controls their mind, controls their behavior. And a lot of people believe that if you don't have these controls, then people will run amok. They'll run wild. Well, I don't believe that. I think there are internal guides that will help us.
We're not smart enough to know the truth.
Well, I think that's correct.
Yeah, that's.
Well, at least we're not willing to see it when it's.
In the church's mind. Well, it didn't. What really happened was the Roman Empire was really losing its power. Constantine saw this opportunity to take on Christianity.
Oh, yes. And it became a tool.
It became a tool, and
Yes.
we just morphed from the Roman Empire to the Roman Catholic Church.
Yes. George, let me point out, if you hold up the book and let's look at that cover.
Yeah.
I love that picture. That's
Tell us
a photograph
about
of a
that
sculpture of a crying angel. And I just had a friend of mine who suggested that I use that, and I thought it was a brilliant suggestion. And I'd like to read about my title.
Please do.
Because one of the things that bothered me when I came up with my title, I didn't want anyone to believe that I thought I had the truth.
Right.
So this is what I write about the title. The meaning of the word truth in the title and subtitle of this book is based on the author's opinion about perennial truths, meaning lasting for a long time or infinite time, backed by evidence that is sustained by scholarship, archeology, and a study of ancient history. The truth will not make one right, but it will make one free.
Absolutely.
That's a very important statement.
Absolutely, without question.
It is this freedom that my book celebrates. This freedom gives us permission to explore ideas outside our existing comfort zone. The picture on the front depicts a crying angel. "It's enough to make an angel cry," is a phrase that I considered as a subtitle. This image of a weeping angel portrays the anguish of a world in travail over the failure of Christianity to follow the teachings of Jesus. That is a powerful statement, and that's basically the summary of my book. It is this failure that has placed our planet in peril in every way. Respect for the individual and respect for the planet on which we live are hallmarks of Jesus' teachings. These teachings have been largely ignored by nations which call themselves Christians, but whose militant behavior belies Jesus' fundamental teachings. Action by these nations have been driven by greed and self-interest and have been supported by members of the Christian community under the label of patriotism. This book is a clarion call to return to and adhere to the teachings of Jesus, the original foundation of Christianity.
So, I couldn't agree more with what you've said there. Very powerful. Whose mind are you going to change with this? Is it going to be someone who's in a fundamentalist mode? Is it going to be someone who's on the fringe, or a guy like me who's where you're at?
If anyone changes as a result of reading this book, it'll be because they have an open mind.
Right.
A closed-minded person first will not even buy the book.
Right.
So that is not my audience. I do not look for a person who already had their mind made up and they have all the answers. I found out in my experience, in my pilgrimage, my spiritual pilgrimage, that I have more questions than I have answers.
Absolutely.
And the older I get, the more questions I have. And I have learned to accept the fact that I don't have the answers to all the questions. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with my insecurity and my uncertainty.
And the fact that God, whatever you want to call it, source, whatever, is really a mystery.
Oh, total mystery.
Huge mystery. And,
Yes.
and I think that's a blessing for us.
And the arrogance of people who think they can define God.
Well, it's a total arrogance.
Yes,
You know, when I think about trying to define God, it's kind of like I have to define anything. I have to draw lines around it, right? I have to make delineation. In doing that, where does that place me?
Oh, yes.
Outside of God.
Yes, absolutely.
And
You're separated by
totally
the very
separated.
act of defining.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a goldfish trying to define the water in which it swims. It's ludicrous.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good picture when we recognize that God is so big and so great that we cannot even fathom how big this concept is.
Can't even wrap our imaginations,
No,
let alone our
absolutely
mind
not.
around it. You know.
Absolutely not.
So, you know, when I look at, you know, like not just fundamentalist, but just the church belief, the standard belief, not the fringe fundamentalists. And you were talking about the real Jesus and the search for the real Jesus.
Right.
And whether he was the only Son of God. How does anybody go to the New Testament and totally miss the amount of times that Jesus himself is said to have said, "And ye are sons of God"?
Yeah. Well,
not by adoption, but by reality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, the interesting thing about people when they come to the teachings of Jesus, they don't.
No, they don't.
They actually focus on the teachings of Paul about Jesus.
Absolutely.
And the reason for that is that it's easy, George, to follow the teachings of Paul. All you have to do is put a wafer on your tongue or believe a religious formula, say a certain phrase, and then you're okay. Well, that's fairly easy. But
Right.
when you get to the teachings of Jesus and you hear him say, love your enemies and do good unto them who despitefully use you, well, wait a minute. Can I do that? How easy is that? How difficult is that?
Do I want to do?
Do I want to? And I bring this out in my book. It's real interesting that during the Republican debate, there was a candidate who addressed the audience, and the audience was probably comprised mainly a very conservative, fundamentalist, maybe Southern Baptist audience. And he suggested that we start using the golden rule in our foreign policy. And they actually booed him, George.
Absolutely.
I was stunned. I could not believe
they would make that an apology.
Yes.
They would interpret that as apologizing for ourselves.
Yes. And so when we really compare the teachings of Jesus with the teachings about Jesus, I can understand why the majority of the churches today are of the Pauline and Nicene Creed-oriented religious Christianism approach, because it's a simple, easy approach.
Yes.
And the majority of people, they don't want to think. They don't want any hard way spiritually to follow. Jesus' way is a tough way. He said, he who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is not worthy of my kingdom. Well, I've been unworthy many times because I've looked back.
Haven't we?
Oh, haven't we all?
Yeah.
And we need to recognize that this is a tough row to hoe. And the spiritual road is work.
Right.
Have you ever heard of George Gurdjieff?
Yep. As a matter of fact, we have a show that focuses, it's 5 o'clock on Saturdays, that focuses on him.
Oh, okay.
It's a great show.
So you know then,
yeah.
And he calls his work the work.
Yep.
And that's what it is. I mean, the spiritual path is effort.
They've named their show, to back up what you're saying, Wisdom Through Action.
Okay, I like that.
Which is, this all takes work.
Exactly.
It all takes work. It's not a free ride.
Well, chapter 19 in my book is one of my favorite chapters. It's called Old Time Religion Has Failed.
Tell us why.
All right. I think it's failed because we've had a terrible misunderstanding of the meaning of grace. And I'm going to read from page 155 in my book here. Grace is actually the foundation of our being on which we stand. It is to the human as water in the fishbowl is to the goldfish. It is that environment in which we move and live and have our being. Grace is unfettered. It needs no justification. It needs no channel through which it is dispensed. Grace is not a transaction to make. It is a gift to receive. We do not need to develop a doctrine in which grace is contained, for it cannot be contained any more than atmosphere can be contained. It is free and not conditioned on our accepting Jesus as our personal Savior. This means that there is no plan of salvation as the fundamentalists prefer to preach. It is tempting to take something simple and mold it into something complex. This practice has been the tradition of Pauline Christianity from the first century. So basically what I'm saying here is that Jesus taught that every human being was a child of God, and his premier parable was a prodigal son. The prodigal son never ceased being the son. Now, he sinned means he separated himself from the Father. Error, thinking, error, action, and behavior, and he suffered the consequences of his behavior. So, people like us take sin seriously. It can destroy human life, and it can destroy this planet. There's no question about that, but we must understand that it's never sin against God. It's sin against ourselves. And this is very important to understand.
That's the first time I had heard grace explained, that we live and have our being in grace.
Yes,
I like that. That's great.
And God's love is unconditional. The prodigal son's father didn't even want to hear his soliloquy about, Father, I've sinned and done this evil in thy sight and am no more worthy to be called thy son. He didn't want to hear that. What did he do? He called his older brother and said, kill the fatted calf and bring forth all the celebration. We're going to have a party. My son who was lost is now found. One who was dead is now alive. And this is the parable that really tells us about Jesus' understanding about humans and human nature. Jesus never taught original sin, George. You cannot find it in his teachings.
Nowhere. I know
it's
for
not
sure.
there.
Do you think that the root cause of this, the Council of Nicaea definitely, but do you think the root cause is making an anthropomorphic God?
That's part of it.
I mean, that's a huge thing. It's like we try and make God in our own image, and we make him a jealous God.
That's right.
We make him all the things the Old Testament talked about.
Yes. And also, you take the scripture that most people really love and appreciate is John 3:16.
Right.
Okay. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Then, verse 17 hardly is ever mentioned. He who does not believe is condemned already, and the wrath of God abides upon him. Now, the wrath of God abides on that individual because you fail to follow a belief system. Now, that is a conditional God.
Absolutely.
And when I ask my friends, do you believe that God's love is unconditional? Oh, yes, I believe God's love is. Well, how about this verse that makes it conditional? It makes it conditional on accepting a theological proposition about Jesus.
Yes, it does.
And Jesus never taught that. And this is the reason why it's very important for us to return to the teachings of Jesus. And I think this is the only salvation for the world.
And we really can't get there in much in the Bible. We find more of that in the Nag Hammadi findings.
Yes.
It's in other documents that were excluded, like you were talking about early on.
Oh, I refer to the Nag Hammadi texts in this book quite frequently. In fact, I have 250 citations in this book.
Just 250?
250, which reveals the research that has gone into this book. And I think that it's very important for the readers to understand that the evidence that I present in this book is worthy of their consideration. Now, whether you agree with me or not, I think you must deal with the evidence that I present, because I do back up a lot of the positions that I take and a lot of the very, very strong charges that I make against Christianity, particularly Pauline Christianity, Nicaean Christianity, that because they focused on the wrong thing instead of focusing on the teachings of Jesus, they have erred.
Well, that takes us back to the Council of Nicaea, and the problem being that if all you do is take the Bible as being the only Word of God, there's a real problem right there.
Right. Oh yes. I deal with that.
Problem.
I deal with that in the second chapter of the book, where I talk about the Bible and the problems. And I think that anyone who reads this particular chapter, it's called A Book by God or A Book About God.
Great chapter.
And so it's obvious that and it's real interesting that Thomas Jefferson is such a powerful mind. And he says the whole history of these books, for example, the Gospels, is so defective and doubtful that it seems vain to attempt any minute inquiry into it. And such tricks have been played with their text and with the text of other books relating to them that we have a right from that cause to entertain much doubt about which parts of them are genuine.
Yet Christians would like us to believe that Thomas Jefferson supported Christianity.
Oh, not at all.
No, not at all.
No.
Listen, we're running out of time. I knew we would. We'd get
it's
involved.
Been fun.
It's been a great fun.
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah,
yes.
Very much. So you got some other things going on that you might want to tell our audience about. You're starting. You have a Sunday afternoon, 5 o'clock or something.
Yes, we are starting a spiritual ministry here in Sarasota, Bradenton area, and it's going to be held at the Unitarian Church on Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock. And I chose that time not to conflict with the other churches such as CPL and Unity of Sarasota and Bradenton and so forth.
Right.
I felt that this would give an opportunity for people who have disenfranchised themselves for whatever reason to find a place to come again.
Well, there are lots of them.
Yes, and I think there are some who will actually find a real direction and a real guidance in our ministry. And so that's one of the motivations why we're starting this spiritual ministry on Sunday afternoons.
I couldn't recommend Don more. give it a try. 5 o'clock, the Unitarian Church. It's on Fruitville.
Yes, 3975 Fruitville Road.
And your website again to buy your book
is religiouslies-religiostruths.com.
Fantastic. Well, we're out of time, and I've enjoyed this. It's been one of our better shows. I'd like to spend a good deal more time with you.
Yes.
And we'll have you back at some point.
Thank you. I'd be happy to come back.
Absolutely have you back. So be sure to come back next week, same time, same place. And in the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week.